Welcome to our tutorial on creating an electronic records and imaging policy. The North Carolina Department of Natural and Cultural Resources, or DNCR, provides a sample template that local and state government agencies can use in crafting a policy that reflects the particular ways that electronic records are created and maintained in your office. This 7-minute tutorial will walk you through the first 5 sections of the policy. Since 1935, North Carolina has had a broad definition of public records. This first version of the law defined public records as those made or received in connection with the transaction of public business. This was codified as Chapter 132 of the North Carolina General Statutes in 1961, and in 1975 this Public Records Act was amended to include electronic data processing records as a category, emphasizing that public records were such regardless of physical form or characteristics. With this understanding that electronic records qualify as public records in North Carolina, DNCR also recognizes that electronic records are difficult to maintain and access over time. So our Digital Services section researched best practices and created this sample policy that covers the essentials that you should address in your agency's policy. You can find a PDF version on our website, and we can also email you a copy as a Word document if you want to make edits to your policy directly. There are 10 parts to our sample electronic records policy. I will briefly walk you through the first 5 sections in this tutorial to highlight what information you should be including. Upon completion of each section, you should delete the text that is in brackets in the sample policy. It is intended for guidance purposes only. The last 5 sections will be described in Part 2 of this tutorial. Section 1 defines the scope of the policy. You should identify which departments or agencies will be covered by this policy, as well as which records it protects. You should indicate whether your electronic records are being created and maintained in-house, or whether you have contracted with a vendor for these services. You should specify the interval at which your agency will review and update this policy. We recommend at least once every 5 years. Section 2 identifies the parties within your agency who will be responsible for maintaining and providing access to your electronic records. There are clear responsibilities for someone in a supervisory position, your information technology or IT staff, and the records creators. Depending upon the size of your agency, you may also have specific responsibilities for your managerial staff. And state agencies may want their chief records officer to have certain responsibilities related to electronic records. Section 3 requires your agency to acknowledge that you will comply with requests for discovery of your electronic records and will respond to public records requests. You should develop procedural manuals that will explain your internal procedures for producing records and for documenting chain of custody. Your agency should produce documentation about your electronic records system, which will be vital if the authenticity of your electronic records is questioned during an audit or litigation. For the same reason, you should routinely audit your electronic records system to verify the system is operating as expected. Training documentation is important for demonstrating that all relevant employees understand their responsibilities. Finally, your agency should document audit trails that, at a minimum, specify who has permission to create, access, and modify records. Section 6 of General Statute 132 clarifies that your IT department is not legally considered the custodian of your electronic records and, therefore, would not be solely responsible for providing access to these records. As is true with any public record, if there is confidential information included on records that are requested, it is the responsibility of your agency to redact that information before filling the public records request. Section 6.1 specifies that your agency cannot choose any electronic data processing system that will interfere with your ability to provide access to public records. Section 6.2 allows persons requesting copies of public records to obtain them on any media which your agency can't provide, which for electronic records could include something like a CD-ROM or a flash drive. However, this section also specifies that someone requesting public records can neither require an agency to compile a record in an electronic format if it does not already exist, nor require an agency to digitize a record that is not maintained electronically. Section 4 builds on the previous section by going into more detail about how your agency will maintain electronic records that are trustworthy. You may find it useful in this process to access another guidance document on our website entitled Guidelines for Managing Trustworthy Digital Public Records. Your agency maintains a secure environment for electronic records primarily by controlling who has permission to create, modify, and access records. Metadata should, at a minimum, maintain file creator, date created, and title alongside the record. And your storage media should be audited at least annually to verify that there is no evidence of corrupted files. Here are some specific suggestions of procedures to explain in this section. How you are implementing consistent file naming practices and choosing reliable file formats to help ensure the accuracy of your electronic records. Your procedures for how you will redact confidential information from electronic records that must be produced for litigation or a public records request. Your plan to store backup copies, as well as system password and operating procedures manuals in secure off-site storage in case of a disaster. How frequently you audit your system, which we recommend on an annual basis, and how frequently you refresh your media, which we recommend every 3 to 5 years. Under what circumstances you will migrate files to new file types. The frequency of fixity checks on your data, your storage conditions for media, and your procedures for labeling optical media and for indexing data stored on servers. Section 5 asks you to elaborate on 3 components of your information technology system. First, identify who will be responsible for training users on the system. Next, explain your procedures for creating audit trails that can, at the very least, document who has read and/or write permissions on files maintained at the agency, and that ideally can log who accessed the system, as well as how and by whom records were created or modified. Finally, document the frequency with which you will audit your system to evaluate its accuracy, timeliness, adequacy of procedures, training, and audit trails. We recommend performing such an audit at least annually. If you would like to hear more information about Sections 6 through 10 of the Sample Electronic Records Policy, please watch Part 2 of this tutorial. If you have any questions, you may contact a records analyst at 919-807-7350.